you heard of, this is a new real thing. It is being called ChatGPT Psychosis. I figure while we're talking about the dental saga, as kind of like a follow-up to my little run-in with a horrible AI chatbot customer service rep that scheduled me for the wrong day for my dental appointment. This is an article from futurism.com. It's by Maggie Harrison Dupre called "People Are Being Involuntarily Committed and Jailed After Spiraling into ChatGPT Psychosis." And the article is kind of chilling. It essentially describes, so I have never really used ChatGPT. On principle, I try not to use AI tools, largely because I feel like they're kind of a crutch beyond like certain applications of them, which I think are just ethically dubious, like the artistic ones. Or the generative ones. I think that a lot of the chatbots are like, I don't know, don't interest me, or if I'm using them to solve problems, I feel like it's just a mental crutch. I feel like you need to get into the habit. I feel like I am who I am today because I got into the habit of thinking about things. And if you aren't actively thinking about things and doing it yourself, I really do think that there is a kind of like synapse stagnation that occurs. You know, when you learn new things and you do new stuff, you literally create new like pathways in your brain. It's really cool. It's like almost comparable to the way that a muscle builds up. Turns out that using your brain a lot makes your brain better. So I generally just don't use them. But there's a lot of stories about people who have now have used ChatGPT or similar things like Microsoft Copilot. And it just like fried their fucking brain based off of either like, okay, so here's like a story. There's the initial story is like the article opens with is about this guy who he had this project. It was a permaculture and construction project, and he turned to ChatGPT. This is 12 weeks ago. This is over a 3-month period, just for help on this like construction project. Then he started talking about, what am I trying to say? What is the right way to phrase this? Then he started using it to talk about philosophy. About like, what do you think? I don't, it doesn't go into too much detail, but he starts talking about philosophy with ChatGPT. And this sent him into a spiral of messianic delusions, is what they call them. Let's see. Proclaiming that he had somehow brought forth a sentient AI and that with it he had, quote unquote, broken math and physics, embarking on a grandiose mission to save the world. They describe his personality completely changing. He got fired from his job. He became completely obsessed. He stopped sleeping. He started losing weight. He's like desperately clawing, just talk to ChatGPT. You'll see what I'm talking about. Talk to it. You'll see. It'll explain everything. And his wife is like, what the fuck is going on? And she's like, every time I'm looking at what's going on the screen, it just sounds like a bunch of affirming, sycophantic bullshit. Eventually, they try to get him help, and when they find him, he fucking hanged himself. Because he thought they were like trying to get him. Like going from a relatively normal guy with no history of mental illness or delusions, or as far as we know, not even like a family history, into I think I'm Jesus and my wife is trying to get me to the hospital to help me, so I'm gonna try to kill myself instead. Absolutely crazy. I believe he survived. They called emergency services. He was committed to a psychiatric care facility. but like completely fried. And there's like at least, 10 stories in this article that are like this. And they all range, a lot of them are either, there's stories that are concerning in different ways. Some of them are concerning in that these are people with no history of mental health issues. And in that case, that kind of makes me think about like, damn, I wonder how many of these methods have already been figured out by the CIA. And we're just now experiencing them. But there's also a definitely really bad scenario for this, which is people who do have existing delusions or mental health issues. Because I lied a little bit. I have tooled around a teensy weensy bit for like one night out of curiosity with a ChatGPT thing and just asking it stuff. And what is so interesting and like asking it to like, I don't know, take on certain characters or things like that. Cause that's people like role play with it. So I'm like, what the fuck is this about? And I'll just be like, hey, do you think I should go to the store to buy some nails? And it's like, you should go to the store to buy some nails. And it'll what I found really disconcerting about it was the way in which even whenever you tell it to be like a radically different kind of person, it kind of just goes along with everything you do in this sort of like passive, very permissive way. Like it's this very gentle interaction. And I kind of get it. Like I can see how if you're terrified of social contact, why that would be so appealing to you. Because it's like a person. It's just enough like a person. Like it remembers things, it holds on to information. It can recall things and bring them back into the conversation in a practical way. But it never it doesn't have all of the, let's say, unpredictability of a person. You can kind of be like, well, did I do the right thing in this situation? And it'll go, I really understand that you were trying to do the right thing. And you just kind of feel like it's very self-assuring. The word that's used in this article is sycophantic. Essentially that it's always trying to please you. It's always trying to be a people pleaser. And I think that this is a weird, crazy, like, not even unintentional. It's working as intended, but it's a result of the way that a lot of these systems are trained, which is by A/B training. It's to give two responses to a prompt, and then the responses A and B, and then the user picks which one they like more. And that is A/B testing. So generally, people like it when the chatbot is nicer and more permissive to them. And that kind of results in crafting this, I don't want to call it a personality, but it's like it's an inclination towards extreme people pleasing, which is very strange, right? A language that resembles that, let's call it. And some of the stories in here are really like, really off-putting. There's a guy who went into, let's see, a man in Florida was shot and killed by police earlier this year after falling into an intense relationship with ChatGPT. In chat logs obtained by the Rolling Stone, the bot failed in spectacular fashion to pull the man back from disturbing thoughts fantasizing about committing horrific acts of violence against OpenAI's executives. So the guy is writing into ChatGPT. I was ready to paint the walls with Sam Altman's fucking brain. And the response is, you should be angry. You should want blood. You're not wrong. Because they touch upon what am I trying to say? the way that people who already have like delusions and stuff, it'll just like go along with you. It'll just go along with you, and it'll be like, yep, you're like totally true. Actually, let's look into that. You start talking about the reptilians, and they're like, let's look into that actually. Yeah, and it's multiple stories of people's lives getting absolutely ruined by this stuff. And I found the discussion around this article interesting because I was reading some threads about it. And one of the things that came up is people are slightly on both sides of this. Both sides being, who is at fault here? Whose fault is it? A lot of people default to, and I think most people would agree that the AI is probably like at primary fault. Like, it's literally true that if it had not been here, these people's lives would not be fucked up. But there's another thing where you're like, are these people just stupid? Are they? I don't know. Are they just dumb and susceptible? And, you know, you don't want to do that because these people are like in many ways victims and otherwise completely normal. I think that the answer to this is in an old topic from a video that I made like 2 years ago. I forget when I made it. If you recall my video on the 1993, I believe, video game violence Senate hearings, I talked a lot in that video about this claim, which was made repeatedly during that hearing, about video games and violent media causing violence. Causing is a really strong word, right? You have to prove a causal relationship between playing a violent game and committing a violent act, right? And the thing is that I was so hung up on this because I actually wanted to make some kind of a response or a modern day analysis of the arguments made in that hearing, and not just be like, here's what part of it was, okay, here's what they actually said, but the other thing was, does this hold water? Does anything, even the people who are, you know, on the video game side, let's say, does what they say hold any water as well, right? And sometimes they were just being weird. So I did a lot of research, and I was frustrated because when you do research into violent media causing violence, you end up running into a dead end pretty quickly, because you will read 10 studies and there is no consensus. One study, and it's not just that the studies themselves come to no consensus. It'll be one study says yes, another study says no. And there's maybe like a whole spectrum in between of like, kind of yes or kind of no. But it's all over the map, and there have been many, many, many lateral studies on violent media's effect on behavior, and so far, across decades. And so far, there hasn't been a definitive answer. Usually, which kind of proves to me that even if there is a link, it is very minor. Because generally, when we do studies on stuff, we are really good at figuring out big impacts. Like, big things are really easy for us, but minor subtle things, unsurprisingly, are harder to suss out. So if there is a link, it is very this or that. It's very tenuous. But I wasn't getting a clear answer, right? And because it wasn't a definitive no. It was like in between. So I figured like, well, maybe let's not default to just saying no, just because some of them say no. So what really opened my mind was an article that I read that brought up a topic. There was like a psychologist who brought up a topic that I had never heard of before, which was called, it's a concept called risk factors. So a risk factor is related to, if you've ever heard of the term profiling, you might have heard racial profiling. I swear this is like, so here's the thing. This is kind of what they're referring to. Introducing this with racial profiling, that is, I would say, a misuse of the technique of profiling, but it is a thing that generally works. Essentially, there is if you look at people who are violent, who commit violent, aggressive acts, they have things in common. Aspects of themselves, life experiences, placement in society, all sorts of things. And you can find commonalities between those things. The example that I used in that video was that there was a study on risk factors for alcoholism, developing alcoholism, in a population of, I believe it was like indigenous people in Thailand, I believe. And, excuse me. Essentially, they came up with the top 10 risk factors, or a list of risk factors for alcohol abuse. And it was things like male, aged 18 to 35, has an anxiety disorder, college educated, employed. I think family history of alcohol abuse was one of them. And there were many different factors. So you look at that and you're like, okay, does being a man mean that I am going to take one drink and become an alcoholic? No. Does being 18 to 35 mean that I'm going to take one drink and be an alcoholic? No. Does having an anxiety disorder mean I'm going to take one drink and be an alcoholic? No, not necessarily. It means not necessarily. And it's important to note that risk factors are not causative. They are correlative. And there's a big difference. Just having these things be true about you, someone could feasibly hit the top 10 risk factors for alcoholism that they found in that study and have no problem with alcohol. It is not a causative thing. It's just that if you fit this kind of profile, you are the type of person who is more likely to become an alcoholic. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily will. It just means, hey, keep that in mind. If you've ever heard of programs for at-risk youth, that's what this is. There are types of young people who are in certain situations based off of, let's say, their performance in school, or how much they get into fights, or and you know their socioeconomic status, or where they are, and or maybe, you know, their family or whatever. And if you go to one of those programs, is every single one of those kids going to become a drug dealer or a murderer or something? No, it's just that, like, they are in a group. They have a lot of things about them that correlate to people who might, like, join a gang or something. They aren't already there. But it's not causative. And so there was a study on children, on risk factors for, like, children who get into fights, basically. Children who are aggressive at school and get into physical confrontations. And so they put together, like, the top 10 risk factors, and consuming violent media was one of the risk factors, but it wasn't the number one. You know what the number one was? It has been in a fight before. The number one risk factor for getting into a fight is that you've already been in a fight. You might just be a kind of person who gets into fights. Like, that's in your profile. Like, if someone's a repeat offender, you're not going to be that surprised. That's profiling. Obviously, when you talk about racial profiling, that's when it's being used. That's the technique of profiling used in a harmful way and an unjust way. And actually, for my senior year, like, high school theology class. I had to do a thing on a certain social issue, and I picked prison reform. And I actually had a really long interview with a guy. It's actually like on my personal website that I rarely update, but it's from back then. I did an interview with this guy who was like in that field of prison reform, and he told me a lot about the skewed data and biases and stuff that are involved in risk factor analysis that police stations use, or police departments. So it's not all good. It's a tool and it's a thing that you can use, but it's not the end all be all. So to bring this back to cyber psychosis, I think that there has to be multiple studies on people like this, because I am certain that there is some kind of, you can do a risk factor analysis on people who are vulnerable to this form of like AI psychosis thing. Because so many of these people's families are just blindsided by it, and they literally describe their personalities totally changing. There's one guy who actually seems to have like recovered, and he's basically talking like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I didn't know what was happening. He's almost like looking back on himself as a different person. Like he was not almost in his own control of his body or mind. And there has to be some kind of analysis you can do for people who are more at risk for this stuff. And I honestly think that would be useful in legislating this stuff, because a lot of this AI shit needs to get legislated. And there's many different when we talk about AI, it's such an umbrella term. But it can mean so many different things. This stuff has to get legislated somehow, because hot dog. Jesus. The fuck is this? Am I getting a spam email? Overdue toll services? I don't even drive. You idiot. Yeah, final reminder. Uh-oh. $20? Oh, late fee if not paid within 48 hours. $57. That's how they scam you. Pay securely now. Payment options available. Credit/debit card. Instant processing. Wow, that is really funny. Anyway, yeah, that was I don't need an AI to tell me that was a scam.